Welcome to Talk Art. I'm Sally Rain, and I'll be your host as we delve into the world of the artist and the art that's all around us. Talk Art is sponsored by the Silicon Valley Open Studios. During the first 3 weekends in May, hundreds of local artists open our studios to the public. For more information, you can go to the website svos.org. Our guest, Janine Calcagno, has been a producing studio potter for over 45 years, and she works with colored slips to decorate her work in a floral Asian tradition. And she's here to demonstrate her techniques. So welcome, Janine.
Hi, glad to be here, Sally.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you become a potter?
I hadn't planned on it. I took a lot of art classes in high school, and when I went to college, I kind of got stuck in a clay class, but it stuck to me, I guess. And so I've really been enjoying working with clay. I like working with my hands, and I like nature a lot, so it was a real fit.
Well, excellent. So you've been working for many years. Have you learned from other artists?
Mainly, when I was in college, I just took a few classes, one each year, and after that, I decided that I really wanted to be a potter. And I'd already gotten a credential, but I thought, gee, if I could only just do clay. So I worked in a production studio with some people, and then later when I moved to set up a household, I decided to stop teaching and set up a studio. So I did a lot of learning with some workshops, and then just reading a lot, and being in art shows, I just asked a lot of questions of other potters.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your influences. You have a lot of flowers in your pieces.
I do. Well, my mother had a beautiful garden. We lived out in the Central Valley amid the alfalfa and tomato fields. And my father set up a beautiful situation with lots of trees, almost like a park setting. And my mother had just wonderful wisteria arbors, tulip beds, you name it. So I was just around flowers all the time. So I guess it just stuck.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, you have some images that you brought of your work. So let's take a look at those now, and you can tell us about your techniques.
That is probably my seminal image that I have come to think of as what just, I don't know, connotes what I really like a lot. It has a spiral that became part of what I use all the time now with all of my bowls and everything. And so it has a classic Chinese plum blossom pattern, which is really part of the culture there. And so I've used that a lot in decorating a lot of my other production work also. But this is one of my favorite images.
Yeah, it looks somewhat three-dimensional. Raised a bit.
It is, yeah. When I work with slips, I'm layering layers of clay, so they build upon each other, and then you end up with a texture. And I really like that in my work. I like to have a lot of texture. And this is a piece that I love because of the cherry blossoms. I got to travel to Japan a number of times, and if you happen to be there at the time of year when the blossoms are blooming, you realize that just a couple cherry blossoms on a piece of work is not really going to
no, they're
not
everywhere.
Part of the deal. So you see the big buses that carry people around, and they have the whole front of the buses painted with cherry blossoms. It just gets in your soul. So when I came back from that trip, I started to make blossoms with profusion. So there you go. I really
that looks like
them.
Very fine work.
It is, and that's every one of those. I use fine points, squeeze bottles to do each one of those petals.
Wow.
Plus, there's little stamens there, and so there is really an incredible amount of work on that, but I still enjoy doing them.
Excellent.
You know, the same thing happens in Japan with the cherry blossoms. You also have the viewing of the maple leaves, just like you have in New England. So that's also a really strong image from that culture. And those are yunomis, those cups. That's a term that's become really popular even in America to use. It's kind of halfway between a teacup and a wine glass maybe. But I made a set for somebody, and that was actually a set for people, and I just liked them so much I took a photo.
They're beautiful.
Thank you. I've done a lot of selling at the Japanese cultural shows in the Santa Cruz, Santa Clara County, I'm sorry. And I've gone to a lot of the Matsuris. And when I was there, I had used this image, and someone said, oh, that's Shochikubai. And when I looked that up, I just Googled it, and I found out it also is used in the Chinese culture. So it's the grouping of plum blossoms and bamboo. And usually it's a evergreen, and I use redwood because I'm a California redwood person.
So you came up with that pattern, and then someone said, "Oh, it reminds them of a different tradition?"
I had seen it in Chinese, but I had seen it in books in books that reference Chinese symbolism, and I didn't really know it had a real focus in Japanese culture. And if you go to at the beginning of the year, sometimes people will put a branch of each of those at the front door and bundle them, and they're kind of considered new beginnings or the start of the new year. So you'll see that a lot of times at the beginning of the year. And sometimes I make pieces like that for wedding presents because I think that symbolizes the new beginnings. At a certain point, I started to work a little bit more in the arts and crafts period movement, doing a few more things that were less flowers and a little bit more oak leaves and ginkgo. And the ginkgo is also one of the most ancient forms, leaf patterns, and so it's also a strong image. And I just love the fall color. So I have a ginkgo tree in my yard.
Oh, nice.
And when they all fall, I leave them on the lawn just so they decorate the whole backyard.
I like the different shades of yellow in that. That's not easy to get with glazes.
No, it's actually coloring in the slip, but you're right. And I used to think that was just too intense, but that actually is the exact color of the darkest part of the ginkgo. So yeah, it's a real striking image. And when you see them, the whole tree line street with ginkgo leaves in the fall, it's really an amazing thing to see. So I like that image a lot. I saw also some blue hydrangeas in Japan once, and I think it's a little bit of artistic license because I've never been able to get a hydrangea that blue. But
it has to do with the soil.
I hear that, and I've tried making that work for me. But I just love the cobalt and the richness of the colors. So that's become a real favorite image also for me to use. I think roses, my mother was a serious gardener, rose gardener, and she had, I don't know, at least 40 or 50 rose bushes and tree roses all over the yard when I was growing up. And so that's also a strong image. And I think if you look at it culturally, it's really considered a flower of romance. You know, everybody can kind of think about that. And so I use that. I like the old rose, the single roses to decorate with.
And I love the shapes of your pieces, too. That's a really long, tall, elongated shape, isn't it?
I poured through a lot of books. I have to say, I hadn't really learned about the arts and crafts period of American art pottery. And so I did a lot of self-educating and just bought a lot of books. I have a huge library. And so a lot of it is imagery and just seeing a lot of the classical shapes that are used in both Asian pottery and ancient pottery, but also a lot of the forms that were done during that arts and craft period. So that's one of them. Dogwoods are really also a strong image I think, in the East Coast even more. So I get a lot of people asking me to do dogwoods, and I like that pattern a lot. And finally, I have a fuchsia. At one point, I was asked to make the prizes for the San Jose Fuchsia Society, so I made tons and tons of pots with fuchsias on them.
Beautiful. So let's go over to the demonstration table because you have a demonstration to show us. So what do you have?
Well, I just thought that I would show how I do my spiral in the middle. It's kind of like spin art. And the whole trick, I've thrown the piece with the iron-bearing stoneware, so it's a dark color. And then I have liquid. This slip is actually just liquid clay. So the consistency is always germane to how it works. And I'm going to add a little water to this, and then I'm going to show you how I do the spiral for the interior of those plates that you've seen. Usually I would have my potter's wheel. It's a little bit easier than doing this with the banding wheel, but I think you'll still be able to get the idea.
So you're painting actual clay onto the clay.
That I am. I'll go this direction. I lay down a layer of it, and then in order to get the spiral, I put a nice thick dollop on the middle. And this is the spin art part. Can you see that?
Cool.
So this is how, I'll set this aside. I have one that's already been set up. So the trick is to, as you work with slip, it absorbs into the clay really quickly, but it still needs to set up for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I add the next layer. So this, I will be preparing to do the decoration. And I learned when one of the trips I went to Japan, that using sumi ink, you can buy liquid ink like this and thin it out, and you can paint it on, use it to paint onto your pot. If you don't like what you've done, you can always wipe it off with a sponge, and then it will burn out. The black won't show when you're finished.
Oh,
so this is how I set up.
So this is kind of your sketch?
I sketch, and it's really a super way to do it, I found. I used to try to do it with, I don't know, pencils and things like that, but they would leave a mark. So you start out and you don't always follow the lines, but I do get just the basic kind of idea of how I'm going to do it.
It looks like you've done this pattern quite a bit.
I have,
it's
yeah.
Beautiful.
I practiced a bit today. So that shows you how I get that basically set out. Then I have my squeeze bottles, and I have all of my slips that I start out with a big bucket of white slip in my studio, and then I use colorants, things like copper and natural oxides like copper and cobalt, iron oxide, rutile, and also you can buy manufactured powdered colorants also, and these are just small packets, but they're powdered, and you can use them just like any kind of paint. So you can mix your blue cobalt with a yellow commercial stain and come out with blue and yellow making green, or you can start out with copper and add a little bit of blue to it, cobalt, and get a blue-green. So there's all those variants, and so I mix them just like you mix paints. Sometimes the colorants were different if you go to a high or low temperature, but a lot of it just has to do with experimenting with your glazes. Every studio is a little bit different. Everybody's materials are different. Everybody's kiln work's different. So I have to say, half the time being using slips, the trick is to keep your squeeze bottles from clogging up. So if I calculated the amount of time that I unclog squeeze bottles, it would be, you know, I don't even know what to say.
Right.
So this is it. I'm going to just do a basic line to show you how I do this.
So you're painting with the squeeze bottle, and that's what gives it that raised effect.
That's how you do it.
On your work.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So you can always add on, change it. You can sponge it off if you want to, but this is a leather hard. So the big trick with working with slip is you want to put wet clay onto wet clay or damp clay so that they bind together and they don't pull away. So I use a lot of plastic sheets, and I know it's not good to have plastic bags these days, but I've collected a big supply that will last the rest of my life, I'm sure. And cleaners bags, even though I don't get anything done at the cleaners anymore. But I do all of those. I use a lot of plastic, and also my trusty spray bottle. So when I go to do the blossoms on this, I have my other one with white. I'm going to show you how I do my plum blossoms. And I'm sorry I have to unplug these, but even just for a few minutes, they clog up. So, oh goodness. This is called squeeze bottle malfunction. So sorry. So you will see just what it is to do.
So this is part of your process.
I have to say,
every artist has something like this that they deal with.
I have to say it's frustrating, but they set up in just 5 minutes sometimes, and you just have to go back and forth. So I didn't set out yet where I'm going to put my blossoms, but I will do that. One maybe right here.
Cool.
And then one thing about copper is it's a fantastic oxide, but it's very intense. And when it fires, it's the one thing that if you have it underneath something, it will actually bleed up. So I have to carve off a little bit of where the copper is.
Oh, I see.
And then I go ahead and do my blossoms.
So you can't paint over it.
No, and I can even, you know, I can decide if I want to do show the 5 petals. And now. Oh, don't tell me. This is so difficult. I had it all ready to go, see, and then I just... Okay, we're in business. So this is the part when you see the raised decoration.
Yes.
And you see all of, you know, the kind of texture. And I really find when I go into a museum and I see paintings, I'm the kind of person that has to like almost bind my hands behind my back so I don't touch the paint, because I really want to see, I want to see how all of the texture feels.
Right.
The tactile part of it is really amazing to me.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea of how the plum blossoms are done.
Beautiful. So now you have some mugs to show us from the beginning to the end.
I have some mugs.
So what are you going to show us on those?
So this will show the whole process from beginning to end. So in my studio, I had everything at one stage of the process. So I had thrown these yesterday, added the handles, trimmed them, and they're all ready to go. Now the thing with the interior of the mug, if I just put a clear glaze on it, it wouldn't be very nice to look at. So I actually coat the inside with a thin solution of slip. You saw the one that I used to paint the spiral was really thick. And this is a thin solution. And with all the mugs, I actually pour it in the interior.
And then just pour it out.
And I pour it out.
It coats the whole inside. Beautiful.
Then I use the thicker solution again. And because when you're drinking from a mug, you want to be able to have a nice surface that you drink from. You don't want to have the raw clay.
Right.
I want to be able to have glaze go, you know, the whole decoration go on the top. So I start with a base pattern again, and I use this brush. This is called a hake brush. It's a very traditional Japanese kind of brush, and you can put on nice solutions of clay.
So it's good for painting thicker substances.
So you see how that is. I've done that on this piece here, so you can see.
Yes.
Then I would have another tub of the blue, and I would dip this part, the handle, into a tub of blue. So my studio has many, many tubs of clay all over the place.
Yes, and colored slip.
It is, all kinds of colored slip. I was in the earthquake in '87, and those things fell onto the ground.
Oh, no.
And I had a big mess because you thought that the lids would stay on, but not quite so good. So now this one is ready. It has the handle done, and this one is ready to go ahead and do the decoration. So I can show you how that's done, and I block it out again. I'm going to do the hydrangea pattern, and I decide where the leaves are going to be, basically. That's always how I start. I start out with the leaves first, and then I usually do the flowers after.
So do you paint the whole leaf and then paint the flowers? Or
I
do. You go, okay.
Yes. So I have many tubs of different colors of green. This has kind of a yellow, it has some yellow in the copper. This one has some cobalt on the copper, so it's blue-green.
Okay.
And this is...
Do you need to let it set in between doing the leaves and the flowers?
I do. So I'm just going to I'm going to block the leaves down so you see how that looks. And it takes more than just one coat to do it. And it goes pretty quick. I mean, it sets up fairly fast, so I can show you each of the leaves and how I do that. So I have smaller Hake brushes. I have many a Hake brush in my studio. And then this one I want to be a darker leaf. And this side.
So how many layers would you paint to make till the leaves are finished?
Usually about 3. So I'll go back to this one.
Oh, so you can do it that quickly?
Yeah, it sets up pretty quick. Yeah, it does. When I go to do the detail on it, I need to let it dry a little bit more.
Okay, but not completely?
But you can see how quickly that goes on. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the flowers. I want to see that
see how the
type
flowers
of
go on?
details.
Sure.
Well, the
Sure.
next step of the way that you're going to show us.
So I block out where the flowers are going to be. And I always, one thing that I learned in Japan that I really liked, I pick up a lot of tricks. I steal ideas from everywhere. And one of the things that I really loved about their work is they always have something on the inside. So they have a lot of decoration that works in and out.
Okay.
So that's part of the deal for me. So I would have a little bit in the inside and then some on the outside.
So what's the next step in your process?
The next step, after I have all the leaves done, then the pot is dried, and I just let it sit on the shelf and dry. So this piece is what they call bone dry, and it's very fragile at this point, because if something like this, when it's still damp, you can fuss with it, but when it's bone dry, if I knock something off, or if it gets damp, it will reconstitute to clay and just fall apart. So I have to be really careful with things that are bone dry, but at this point, once they're fully dry, I put them into a kiln, and and you can set them inside of each other, things next to each other, they don't stick, and I do what's called a bisque firing, and that's a partial firing in order to get the pot so that it is able to accept glaze. And this is a bisque pot. It's still absorbent though, so it's not, you couldn't drink out of it or anything like that. This is what low temperature pots like your terracotta that you grow plants in are like that.
Okay.
So I have...
and so you said they don't stick together in the kiln. Is that because it's not glazed? It's slipped?
Because it's not glazed yet. So now I'm going to I'm going to use a liquid wax, and you can purchase wax that's like that's a liquid form.
Interesting.
And can be painted on.
And what is the wax for?
The wax is to secure all the area that I want to have stay. Oops, wrong place. Stay. I want to save for not to have any glaze on it. That's what I'm trying to say here. I put wax all the areas that I want to have unglazed, so that when I dip this into glaze, it will just slough right off of those areas. So whenever I have even the pieces that are like this, any piece that you see, wherever there's just raw clay, exposed clay, I had to wax it. So that can be sometimes the most, for me, that's one of the more tedious parts of it, but kind of meditative. So you wax that whole area, and then when that's all done, I dip the whole thing into a clear glaze.
Excellent. Well, let's take a look at some of your finished pieces. You have some images of your studio and then some images to talk about that you've created.
Sure. So here are a group of pieces that I did this year for the show. I do a show in Palo Alto for the Association of Clay and Glass Artists. And that's one of the most wonderful shows in California. And so I did all the raw pieces, and here you see where I'm decorating. And one of the things about doing big pieces, I try to make sure that each area that you look at the pot from every direction around has a nice view. So that takes a little bit of time with especially big pieces. So you see all the tubs and things. And here's where I've got all of those wax. So all that area that you see that looks kind of orange, I've taken wax, even around the wisteria with a little brush, the whole thing. So those are all been waxed and left. The colored area is ready for glaze. And then I have a big tub of liquid glaze, and it's just a clear. So the clear is just there to give a gloss to the clay. I dip them in, and that's what they look like. You can see where all the areas
the
with wax.
So the white turns clear.
The wax will illuminate and be clear. And there you go. Those are the same pieces and what they look like. And so you can see how the color shows through. And you see the raw toasted clay color. And I also do reduction firing. It shows the color. So this is a piece that I did in collaboration with William Morris, who makes mica shades. He lives in Benicia, and I met him at a show, and he asked me to make bases for him. So he does all the turned wood, and he and his wife do the shades, and I think he does a grand job.
So that's a collaboration that you work on. It is a collaboration,
and I do, when I make the piece, the vase, I put a hole at the bottom, and then he gives me specs as far as how wide to make the top and the bottom.
Do you plan in advance how the shades and the base will work together?
Yes, he has certain sizes, so he gives me the dimensions, and then, yeah, it's a bit of work, but kind of fun.
More bamboo.
More bamboo, yeah. It shows all the pieces that I do. A functional work, and I really love doing functional work, too. It's one of the biggest parts of my my work.
And you can see the spiral and everything.
It is, and they're the mugs. I think everybody in the United States or wherever are drinking so much coffee because I make so many mugs.
Well, they're beautiful. Thank you for showing us how you create them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so tell us where we can see your art. Where are you showing?
The main place I show is at my home, actually, when I do my open studio, and that's coming up in October. So if people get on my website, they can see where that is in Santa Cruz. And I do the big show, I said, in Palo Alto, the Association of Clay and Glass Artists, which is a wonderful show.
So you do the Santa Cruz Open Studios in October, and then during the summer?
The summer, it's in July, usually, that show. And then I have sometimes I'll do a Christmas show. I used to go all over to sell in different places. Now I stay at home and just invite people to my house. It's a lot easier. So, and my studio is always open. If people want to come, they can always call by appointment, and they can come see my studio.
Excellent. So your work is just beautiful, and the influences of the Japanese art, I think, are fabulous. So thank you so much for being part of Talk Art. And I think showing us the little details and how much work it actually takes for each little flower is quite amazing.
It does. It's not for those who are not patient.
No. A little bit of attention to detail. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome,
been a
Sally.
pleasure.
Thank you.